Today we meet Jeanette Ellis, author of Forbidden Rites and expert in the study of witchcraft. Jeanette explains the history of this subject and takes us to the historic town of Mistley, where Matthew Hopkins, the infamous Witchfinder General, began the persecution of British witches. Hi Jeanette, thank you so much for inviting us to your incredible home. Now, we've come today to talk about the history of witchcraft. Now, that's a subject that you've studied for many, many years, and you're an expert in the field on it. But we'd love to really go right back into the past and the history of witchcraft and where it started and really where it is today. So if you can tell us the origins of witchcraft and how it all began.
Witchcraft itself is sort of lost in the mists of time. Nobody can really put a finger on where it started. There are those that believe that it started early in 1900s. There are those that think that it's the remnants of the Druid religion. Mm-hmm. So it's very difficult to actually quantify it. And there, of course, there's been persecution of, when I say witches, it's a term that they label people who use magic for bad purposes, which is not, of course, what it means today. It's just those who use magic to heal. But certainly, even back in Roman times, those who used curses were persecuted, and to some extent there's reasons behind that. It's like committing a murder to use to the excess of magic. So there were reasons for that, but when we come into 1480 onwards to 1700, which is when it really kicked off in Europe, and most people think of as the times of persecution for witches.
Times, yeah.
Not so much the burning time, certainly not in England.
Oh, okay.
That's a myth.
Oh, right.
Witches were hung in England.
Right.
But across Europe, unfortunately, yes, they were burnt. It sort of started in Holland and round and the areas. The worst was in Southwest Germany. And France, and of course fueled by the Inquisition. It spread completely. There were between 40,000 to 100,000 people.
So where did the word witch actually come from, and then the word witchcraft?
They're Anglo-Saxon. They mean
Okay.
wise woman.
Right.
They're something totally different. But when I say that the witchcraft was persecuted in ancient Rome, that's where people have used that word to describe people who use bad magic or dark magic, black magic, if you choose to use the term.
So witchcraft was in England centuries ago. Could you say that witchcraft was used in Egypt? Would you say that the gods of old would use
I can certainly say
witchcraft?
that.
Would you call it witchcraft?
Whether you call it witchcraft,
Or
of course, it's a
magic.
different thing altogether.
Magic.
You can certainly call it magic.
Right.
Yes, I mean,
Okay.
Egypt and Egyptians were steeped in magic. The whole of their life revolved around it. From getting up and praying to Ra to the time to go to bed, there were different spells for different things. So the whole of their life was involved with magic, as were every religion.
So who were the gods of old, hence Egypt, and other parts of the world? Who were they, and what kind of magic would they have used? What would it have been called? Would it have a special name?
No, magic was part of life.
Just magic was magic.
Yeah. I mean, as a Christian would think of prayers, so a worshipper of the different gods and goddesses of ancient Egypt would just think of magic. It was just what they did. They also used prayers to their gods and goddesses, of course. But
Would
it
this
was
be
just
limited
life.
to the high priests and priestesses? Or was magic a part of...
It was a part of everybody's life.
Every day of life of everyone.
Most definitely. I mean, certainly worshipping the gods might well have been mainly for the priests and priestesses, mainly priests. Certainly once you get to the higher levels within a temple, the general public didn't enter temples in the same way as people would enter a church. The priests were there to do the work, and the work was in worshipping the gods, to make sure that they were worshipped to a standard, if you like, and that was their job. And the general people, their job was just to live and to do the different tasks that they needed to do, whether that was to grow corn or to ferry people along the Nile, whatever your job was. But a priest's job was to make sure that the gods looked favourably on Egypt. So they had to perform that to its
fullest potential.
Fullest potential.
So if we bring witchcraft back to England, now when people hear the word witch and witchcraft, they tend to think of bad things and people putting curses on things, which we've just discussed. But what about the other side where, as you say, witch meant wise woman? So if you can just tell us about the wise women and really why it went down the line where it went so wrong for them, where they were persecuted into being, sadly, these characters which were old hags and, witches aren't like that.
Most of the women who were deemed witches, whether they were old or whether they were young, were mainly ladies who knew... First of all, we must realise that everybody knew herbcraft.
Oh, everybody?
Everybody knew herbcraft. Let's face it, even most people today know a little of this and that on the way of
lavender
herbs.
On your pillow to make
you sleep. Of course, yes. So you take it back then, everybody knew a little something of it. Even if they'd only been to the wise woman and the wise woman had suggested using lavender, then you ain't going to forget it. You ain't going to go and pay again for the same information.
That's true. You learn fast.
You learn fast. And you pass it on to your children, and therefore, so everybody did know a little of the herbs.
Yeah, it's like aspirin.
Yeah, of course. Willow. White willow bark. But obviously the wise woman in the village knew that little bit more. She knew how to use digitalis, which is foxglove.
Okay. And
you've got that which affects the heart, so you need
just
the right amount.
Exactly.
You can't just say, yes, of course, go use foxglove. It's not that simple.
No.
You have to know exactly what you're doing.
Well, it is like a doctor, isn't it?
It is indeed. Well, in fact, with digitalis, that's where the doctors learnt about it, was from the local wise woman. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name, but this doctor in a certain village gave this woman £10 for all her knowledge on foxglove. It's him that has the statue in the village, and he is down in the medical books as being the founder and of the use of digitalis.
So he nicked her glory.
But he nicked it all from the wise woman down the road, yes. And this happened over and over again. And of course, most wise women were wise enough not to tell anybody exactly what they used in their mixtures and things. Cunning women had a certain specialness about them. They were obviously there to bring babies into the world and to lay out the dead. And so this gave them a certain power that the local priest didn't like, because therefore they weren't completely under his control. They were also under the local cunning woman's control. If she said, the only way to cure your headaches is to walk around with a branch of rowan stuck in your hair, they'd do that. But if the priest therefore sort of said, you know, he had all these people with rowan in their hair, he was annoyed. He didn't like them taking orders from other people.
Because he'd probably want people just to go to church and pray.
Yeah.
That it would go away.
This would be so obvious that...
So there was a bit of a...
There was definitely... She was sapping and taking his power, which I'm not over enamoured with, shall we say. So that was one of the reasons. The other reason, of course, was sheer greed. People were paid to go witch hunting, as Matthew Hopkins was. First of all, set the scene. We have James I. He was witchophobic and was persecuting witches left, right and centre.
Why? Why did he start down that path? Did something
He had a
trigger
fear
that
of
off?
witches. He had a fear of magic.
Okay.
When he crossed to Denmark to take his bride and to bring her back, there was a big storm at sea, and he blamed witches for causing the storm, because witches are known to use magic with weather, but mainly this is for the good of crops and such like. It's not to drown the king at sea, basically. But his new wife's father was very anti-witch as well. So she'd have been brought up in a court that was very much against witchcraft, or rather against dark magic. We must distinguish the two, really.
Who did practice dark magic then?
I wonder if anybody did.
But they just believed if someone had power, that it could be used as dark magic. So that was really the fear of it. Someone who knew more than they did. They thought, well, if they know, I suppose it's like that old chestnut, isn't it? Knowledge is power.
Yeah.
And so anybody who
anything that went wrong, suddenly it was the local witch's
blamed.
fault. And this happens all over the world, unfortunately. It's always somebody's fault. It's never the person involved's fault.
If you can, as we're talking about witchcraft or witches around the world, what do you know about witchcraft in Africa?
That's still going... sorry. I nearly said it's still going on today, but what I actually mean was persecution of innocent people is still going on today. It's only a few years ago in Kenya, people were burnt to death, women were burnt to death for witchcraft. And
because you hear stories on the news, don't you?
you do, yeah.
People are still in these villages.
And there are still witchfinders in those villages. And they still go around and use whatever means they've decided to choose who's a witch and who's not. Some of them by just their special little stick. If their little stick wiggles in their hand when they point it at somebody, that's enough to have those people thrown out of the village. And oh yes, we'll pay this witchfinder.
That's right. So I suppose it was very lucrative, wasn't it?
Don't we give a little clue here to what actually is going on? These people are after wealth and they're after power. And, you know, who's the worst here? These poor innocent, usually women, because they're meeker and easier targets. And these men are...
But half the people that were accused of witchcraft didn't even practice it. It was just someone there was a grudge with and the finger was pointed.
Yeah. Or they were easy targets. Old women, possibly a touch of senile dementia, as we'd call it now, or just old and unable to really fight back. The first one that Matthew Hopkins picked on was an old woman with only one leg. And this is the start of his career. And this wonderful title of Witchfinder General he bestowed on himself. Although he told everyone it was, a government title that had been bestowed on him, nobody queried it. Nobody thought to go back to the government and ask, well, is there actually, have you actually appointed a Witchfinder General? Because if anybody asked, the answer was no.
So where was the areas that he operated in?
Mainly in Essex and around there.
Okay. Did he ever go abroad?
He probably studied abroad during his adolescence. He could actually read and write, and in Latin as well. So he was quite learned, but there doesn't seem to be any, nothing that we can trace of any university in this country. So he probably did study abroad. His mother was Huguenot, or of Huguenot descent rather. So she may well have had relatives still in France or in the Low Countries, Holland and around there. So he may well have studied there.
When people were accused of witchcraft, there was people saying they had hallucinations of demons and things like that. What do you know of ergot, which caused things like that?
Yes, of course that can do, and yes, we did of course grow rye in this country, and ergot is a fungus that grows on rye and is then made into bread and is not affected by the oven, so it's still hallucinogenic. That could quite possibly have been. It was also, which is another thing which the cunning woman would use, because it also causes you to lose a child.
Oh.
So it would cause a miscarriage. So that was one way of regulating how many children you had.
So people would
very much
eat ergot?
Well, they would
something
be
with ergot
given
on it.
They would go to the wise woman and say, I am pregnant again. And she would give them some ergot. And that would cause the child to abort.
That sounds very dangerous.
Everything is dangerous.
But again, she knew the limitations.
She knew exactly what she was
the
doing.
wise one.
She could also bring off a child that was overdue and giving, that might have actually have killed the mother if it had stayed any longer and grown any larger. So again, ergot would be given, and the child would be born beautifully and with less pain for the mother. Another reason why the local priests didn't like the local cunning woman. Roman Catholic priests, as you know, you're not allowed to practice contraception, so lots and lots of children. Anybody who limited the amount of children that a woman had,
so again,
weren't pleased with this, were they?
Control. What can you tell us about the book, the Malus Maleficarum, is it?
Yes. That is, again, that's brought out by the Pope. First of all, they decided about I think it's 9/5, that they didn't believe in witchcraft.
Okay.
Witchcraft was a myth. Anybody who believed in witchcraft, they were going against the Christian tenets. But then somehow or another, this got changed somewhere along the line, and they set up the Inquisition, and that went in search of witches. And
how many people? Because it wasn't just women, was it? It was men as well.
Yes.
How many people do you think, if we know the records, died here, murdered?
I'm not sure exactly how many in England, but certainly overall, they reckon between 40,000 and 100,000 people. Mainly women, but not all by any means.
What did the age range start from? Where
as young as you like.
What, even from children?
Yeah.
Children would be accused of
course.
witchcraft.
Well, they would just be, if you like, thrown into the fire with the mothers.
Oh dear,
It's quite horrendous. But then you must also remember that although women were hung in England, the Roman Catholics were burning the Protestants, and the Protestants were burning the Roman Catholics.
It really was.
So I suppose really
yeah.
we were very, very lucky, the witches, that they never ended up in the fire in England as well. They certainly did, of course, in the continent. But so it seems quite incredulous to us that anything like that would actually be used. But
so when the wise women of the villages start to die out, that must affect people on a medical level. I mean,
yes, of
people
course.
must start to die of all kinds of diseases if there wasn't someone there to look after them. How did that work out?
Well, you're decimating the population by burning women, because women obviously then produce children. You're again affecting it by taking away the educated, if you like. Perhaps they're not schooled, but they are educated in the use of herbs and doctoring, and are the only doctors. So again, you're lowering the chances of people's survival.
What do you know of the male witches like Paracelsus and Agrippa? Because these people were quite high up in the profession of magic, so they don't seem to be touched. They were like left alone.
When you come to Christian versions of magic, that's slightly different. They were still walking a very, very fine edge, but they hadn't quite, if they were very lucky, didn't quite tip over.
Okay.
You've got people like Nostradamus, who predicted the death of the French Henry II. And
because the Queen Elizabeth I used.
Oh yes.
Used, I think they were called seers then. Is that right? Is that correct? Seers.
Yeah. So she had Dr. D.
That's right.
And he would, well, actually it was his friend Kelly that actually did the scrying into black mirrors, which black mirrors are actually a slice of obsidian. And in fact, I can show you one.
Now we've just mentioned, we've been talking about the scrying which Dee and Kelly used, yes, when they worked with Queen Elizabeth I. But there are many other tools of the trade of witchcraft. If we could just talk about some of those now. In Harry Potter, there's his wand, isn't there? They all have a special wand, and they all come from different trees. But witches actually do use wands, don't they?
Oh yes, yes. It's all part of magic, and wands have their place within witchcraft. Yes, indeed.
So if you can just tell me, how is a wand chosen for? Does a witch choose a wand, or does someone else choose the wand for the witch?
Preferably the witch makes their own wands.
Oh, okay.
Not that I haven't been given some very beautiful ones over the years. That one was given to me at one of my festivals.
Wow.
And a lovely lady just came up to me and said, "I've made this for you, thank you very much." And I keep
beautiful.
it just...
It's very delicate,
It is. It's very beautiful and very delicate.
Because they do come in all shapes and sizes and materials.
Yes, of course. This was actually made from one of the sticks from the Jack in the Green, which is why she gave it to me. My own one, that I use most of the time, is a long solid piece of crystal.
So why do witches use wands? I know it's a silly question, but some people might not know.
there are different types of covens, and all of them have different approaches to magic. There are some that call the quarters, which are sort of guardians, by using a wand. There are, obviously, they are also used in magic itself, and in some parts of rituals are also conducted by using the wand.
Now, it's not just wands, but there's many other things, if you can just explain.
There's something called an athame, which is a knife. Oh, dear. But the only thing is, it's not allowed to cut anything. So certainly it isn't anything nasty in any shape or form. In fact, it must not be allowed to touch blood. Okay,
so what is it?
It's exactly the same as this Tibetan knife here, or rather it's used in exactly the same way.
Wow. That's some piece.
Yes. This is a knife of the goddess, and it's not used for sacrifice. It's a protection.
Okay.
And this is Tibetan. And an athame is used in exactly the same way.
Well, I think I'd go running if I saw that. Someone came to me with that.
But it also protects you from dreams.
Oh, very interesting.
Or rather, as we would say, nightmares.
Okay. Well, you hear about the dream catcher, which is supposed to protect one
North
from
American
dreams.
Indian,
so,
yes.
Yes, it is. So what's the equivalent?
Well, this protects you.
So if someone came to a witch and said, I'm having bad dreams, what would protect them from their dreams?
We would probably... witches would normally use some type of stone these days. Tiger eye, for argument's sake, which is very protective. Or some of the black stones are also very protective.
Like the obsidian?
Like the obsidian, yes, indeed. Okay. But athames are very similar to, in their magical use, are very similar to the Tibetan knife.
Okay. Now, we have to talk about the broomstick and the cauldron. We just have to.
The broomstick is obviously so well known in connection with witchcraft. And yes, it is real. It is used within witchcraft circles, but slightly differently in as far as it's used to clear the area of negative magic. So you'd sweep the area before conducting a ritual. It's also used to jump the broomstick. I'm sure that you've heard that expression.
Right, the song, isn't there?
Yeah. Come on, little baby, let's jump the broomstick. It was a leftover. It has been used all over the world as a symbol of joining of marriages outside the church.
Yes, it is, isn't it? It is all over the world, the broomstick.
It is,
it's not
yes.
just English.
No.
Or British.
It's a symbol of a combination of male and female energies.
Now, it has to be made from something special, doesn't it? Tell us about that.
Well, the stick part that is within that's not the top end, but the end within the branches, has a phallus carved in it.
Okay.
And then the phallus is, shall we say, forcibly inserted into the bundle of twigs to actually make the...
And what is the shaft and then the twigs, so what are they made of?
They're made of different kinds of woods.
Oh, so it doesn't have to be something specific?
The shaft is usually made from ash.
Okay.
But, to be honest, that's because it's a nice, strong, straight piece of wood. It has energies, are very sun orientated, which is male, and so therefore it has all sorts of good magic locked within it. The twigs, they have different meanings in different places, but then you're also limited to what you can gather. People didn't travel very far from where they were. So you've got this list of twigs that I can reel you off, but the truth is, they used what they could get.
Okay. What do you know about the broomstick where it would send a message if the wise woman was at home or she was there visiting?
Well, I tend to wonder whether this actually was true of all women rather than wise women. You see, what they used to say is, if you were cleaning, you were using the besom within your home. Right, you had your house all neat and tidy, so you then put the besom outside your door to let your neighbours know that, okay, coffee mornings.
It's a modern call. Come for coffee.
Yes, that's it. You're all neat and tidy.
Tea, I guess, in those days.
I think it probably could have been, yes.
Raspberry tea.
Everything was all ready to receive visitors. Mm-hmm. So, personally, I don't think it applies just to witches. I think it was...
It was for everyone.
I think it was for everyone.
Every lady.
We have no proof whatsoever. It may have only been just to say that witches were at home and ready to receive their witch friends.
So what can you
but
tell
I
us?
often wonder these days, with the new satellites and such like, and putting them straight on the photos of houses on the web, perhaps we could start putting our besoms outside our doors again.
Oh, that's true.
And then we could just look at our friends and say, oh yes, the besom's outside, so it's okay to nip round for coffee.
That's a really good idea, actually. But people used to decorate, the women used to decorate them, didn't they? Is that true? With the ribbons and feathers and things? Yeah. What did that mean exactly?
You decorate for different festivals and such like.
Right.
And, well, lots of things were decorated, of course.
Just before we go into talking about the festivals, if we can just talk a little bit about the cauldron, because that is so used in witchcraft for different reasons.
Yes, it is, yeah.
And it has certain symbolic meanings as well.
Oh, it does. I mean, it's the womb of the goddess. It's the chalice. It can be everything. But you must remember, again, that everybody had one in those days. Mm-hmm. It's like the athame, the knife. Everybody had a knife to which they were used all the time. You know, men, women, doesn't matter. Women would use it to cut up the meat for dinner. Men would use it, I don't know, to whittle sticks, to do different things that ever men did.
Wicker work. Wicker work. Very appropriate.
You know, to cut twigs for thatching and what have you. So they used the tools of witchcraft were very much tools that were about the house at the time. Something we don't tend to sort of realise. We think of a cauldron as being something special, and it's quite expensive to get hold of nowadays. But for them, it was their cooking pot.
Yes.
You know, you stuck, you made stew in it one day. You put something over the fire and roasted in it the next day. It was what cooked absolutely everything. You put a lot of boiling water in it and had pots with different things in the same cauldron. And, you know, you had cooked all your different vegetables.
General use, yes.
It was totally general use. So, of course, you stirred up your potions and lotions in it as well. And if you were really rich, well, possibly you had two. And you kept one for dinner and one for your poisonous potions and lotions. But if not, you give it a good scrub and hope for the best.
Well, I hope so. What can you tell us about puppets?
They were little people that you made from cloth. Any old bits of cloth, because again, people weren't rich. They didn't have great quantities of expensive fabric that they could call on, and so you made it from what you had. You stuffed it with straw. I won't tell you how to bring it alive, but there are different ways, that different things that were added to it to do that. And they weren't only used for cursing, which is the modern misconception. Lots of times they were used to heal. You could I don't want to go into too much detail about spells and such like.
No, that's fine.
But you could use them in different ways for good magic. They're not only used for bad magic. These are mandrakes, male and female. So a mandrake and a woman drake, actually. And they're dug from the ground when they're damp.
Okay.
And these particular, this is a way of doing it, are then popped into a mould, and they're left to dry within the mould, and they take on the figure of a man or a woman. Ideally speaking, of course, the best of the mandrakes are, when they're picked from the ground, they have a female or male form. But they are incredibly rare, even rare.
How do they grow? I mean, how? Because I've heard of strange ways that they're supposed to have grown from dead men's seed. So, but I'm sure that's not the case.
Oh, I'm sure it is.
Oh, do you think it is?
No. That came about in the 17th century, when it was suggested that when somebody was hung,
yes.
I don't know whether you can say this, but supposedly they ejaculated. Right. And the seed falling on the ground produced the mandrakes under.
That's what I read, actually. Yes.
That's the 17th century.
But apart from that, how are they grown?
Well, they're grown like any other plant. They come from North Africa, or from Egypt,
right.
and around there, Tunisia and along the coast there.
Okay.
They were then came over and replanted in the south of France, and some of them, and from there they travelled around Europe. I mean, when I say travelled, not personally. They were grown and taken around Europe.
Yeah.
And of course, this wonderful story of how they can't be taken from the ground without screaming.
I've seen that again in Harry Potter. They have the earmuffs on and they're pulled up.
Personally, I think that is because that made sure that people didn't go around digging them up themselves. But strangely enough, even if you go back as far as ancient Greece, there is. I have this wonderful thing about how to dig up the mandrake, and you have to get your sword, and you have to go around 3 times, exactly the same as the witchcraft circle. Strangely enough, this is right back into ancient Greece, and you make 3 circles with a sword around it, and you chant to it about love, and all of this. Strange thing is, you have to put wax in your ears. Now, it doesn't say anything about a scream, but it does say that you must put wax in your ears first.
Oh,
and
it's
right
very
the way,
spooky, isn't it?
Right the way back there is something about it. Now, although I've never done it with any mandrake, and I've got some pieces of white bryony, got some white bryony wands, but I've also got some jalap root from the Caribbean, and this is very similar and used in much the same way. Jalap root is also High John the Conqueror root. Now, pieces of that you put into a bottle and you add different oils. That does almost scream. Not physically, but it screams mentally.
Oh wow.
When you can hear this big explosion of energy.
Like I was going to say
a release of energy from it.
Now you've studied herbs, haven't you, quite a lot?
Yes.
So you do know your business. You are, can I say cunning woman or a wise woman? I think it's more appropriate. So you
Thank
know,
you. It's very sweet.
do know about herbs. And I have seen you have got an amazing, I can't say it.
Apothecary?
That's the one. Thank you very much. Now, Jeanette, if you can tell us about the Sabbats, or the witches' Sabbats.
Yes, of course. There's 8 of them a year, and they progress around the year, reflecting the farming, basically, cycle of the year. So you start off or end, whichever you prefer to put it, with Halloween. And that's a celebration. It's a celebration of death, basically. It's the time we remember those that we loved and lost.
Okay.
And they're invited back to the witches' circle. And then it goes on through the year to Yule. And all the solstices and equinoxes, for some witches, are god festivals, with the ones in between those being the goddess festivals.
Okay.
So then there's Imbolc, and that would be, in the olden times, would be a time when you would bless the plough, and it's a smithing festival, and so many witches bring in whatever work they actually do. Not everybody, obviously, these days is a farmer or a smith. So whatever you do, it's time to bring a little remembrance of what you do into the circle, and ask for a bit of good luck with that for the rest of the year.
Yes.
Because obviously, without that, none of us can do very much at all.
It's true. We all need a bit of that.
We all need a bit of cash.
So there's different gods, isn't there? There's like the Oak King and the Holly King, if you can explain about those.
They are the summer and the winter variations for some witches. Others have a single god that goes through the year and ages, and at Yule is sacrificed, gives up his life voluntarily to be sacrificed, and then is reborn and starts the year off again.
Is this so? This goes up to the winter solstice.
That's the winter solstice at Yule. Yes.
So a lot of the festivals, which are the pagan festivals, have then been incorporated into like the Christianity.
Oh yes.
Yes. So if you can explain which ones cross over.
All of them.
All of them. Okay. So Halloween. Oh, sorry.
Halloween.
Samhain.
Samhain, of course, is the old Celtic name for it.
Okay.
Halloween is the modern, what is sometimes used by most people. But of course, the Christian wording is All Hallows.
Ah, right.
For Yule, which is the winter solstice, the Christians call it Christmas. Even though, of course, they have no idea when Jesus was born, but they decided to stick it on that particular day because that was the day of the invincible sun. It's the day, a few days after the actual solstice. The sun holds in the sky. If you're a farmer and you see it on the horizon, it will appear for a few days to actually think about whether it's going to grow big again and become summer.
Is that where it sort of stays static, for want of a better word, for about 3 days?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Well, it's almost an entire week, a few days before it's at the solstice and then a few days after. And it's there and it thinks about it for a week, almost.
Because this is also very important to Druids, isn't it? It's
yes,
the
indeed.
main point with the Druidism.
And then it passes this point and it starts to grow again.
Yes.
So Christmas Day is the first day of the invincible sun as it starts to turn and grow. And that was when lots and lots of different festivals were celebrated. Apollo, one I can't remember at this moment.
Well, it's interesting you should say that because I was doing an interview with Peter Joseph and I can't remember the correct terminology, but he explains how many different religions come under the same kudos as the sun going down and the birth of the new god.
Yeah.
So it is incredible. There is quite a few going back in history.
Oh, yes.
Krishna, I think, was one as
Yes,
well.
yeah.
Apollo and many others. Can't bring them to the top of my head at the moment, but there was quite a lot actually.
Yeah.
And I was quite amazed. I mean, I knew about Druids, but I was amazed how many and how far it goes back.
Well, it's such a momentous thing in the lives of every country around the world. When you see the sun hovering, will we get a summer? If we don't get a summer, the crops won't grow.
Yes.
Therefore, like the Vikings thought, we would go down into a winter that lasted forever.
Yes.
If it doesn't start to return. And they held their breath until they saw it start to return and the sun to start to climb the sky again. So it meant so much. It meant you lived or it meant you died. There was a real meaning to it.
So everything was based around the sun, the birth of the sun coming back.
Yeah.
What about the Mayans and the Aztecs? I mean, would you class that as, well, maybe as a kind of magic, not necessarily witchcraft, but...
certainly they had their magic, yes. And they also obviously worship the sun. In hot countries, it's even more important than it is in our colder countries. In some ways, it's there. It's so much beating down on you that you can't miss it. And unless you sort of placate it and ask for something a little bit less strong, then you'll frizzle and you will burn, to say the least.
So people think when they hear of witches and witchcraft and magic, I suppose they do instantly bring to mind the picture of a witch, but as we say and we're talking about now, it just goes back into so many different cultures and goes back thousands of years.
The god of the witches, you can trace it back to the earliest of the gods worshipped in the world. It was there at the beginning. I feel he'd be there at the end.
If we can just talk a little bit about the goddess.
The goddess is
in
quite...
all forms, yes.
Yes, she's quite a mainstay of witchcraft. She's the maiden, mother and crone. A woman in all her three different aspects, her most important times of her life. Maiden, obviously, young children, up to the time, if you like, when she gets her first period. Because obviously in the olden days, that was much later than it is these days. You wouldn't get it to 18 or 19, and by then she would probably already be married. And then the mother, and at the end the crone. And we have different colours for each of the goddesses. We have white for the maiden, and red for the mother, and black for the crone.
Okay. Now there are many different goddesses, aren't there? There's not just one goddess that you think of, and if you can just talk about the different goddesses that people pray to. I
don't actually personally call it praying to. I call it working with.
Okay.
They don't take them as being like the Christian God and needing placating and such like. They're people of much higher intelligence, abilities, whatever you like to say, that actually will lean down and help. So there isn't the same we're not worthy type of aspect.
So you're not
humbled
by them?
In no way at all. They don't go down on their knees to their goddess. They stand up tall and strong, like a mother, like a child reaches for mother. So you stand up to your goddess. It's only mummy upstairs, so you don't have to worship mummy.
Now I can't end this session without us talking about the moon. I must talk about the moon and all the different moons that there are, and the phases. If you can just tell us about that.
Yes. There's the waxing moon, which belongs to the maiden, a small little slither of moon in the sky. And then you come to the full moon of the mother goddess, the strong moon that guards and pulls the tides of both the sea and of Magick. And then you have the waning moon, belonging to the crone. And this is the time when you do magic for divination and taking away. And by that I mean taking away of pain and taking away of illness.
Would that be useful, getting rid of things out of one's life?
You can also use it for that, yes.
But magic's never used, or should be never used, for harm.
No. The Wiccans have a saying, do what thou wilt, if it harm none. It's very, very difficult to do anything bad that doesn't harm anybody.
Yes, that's very true. What's the rule of 3?
If you were to do something as stupid as to curse somebody, then you'll get it back 3 times over. But of course, if you do nice magic, like healing and such like...
I was going to say, do you get the benefits?
You do indeed.
You help someone across the road. It comes back 3-fold.
Yep.
Oh, that's always good to know. So hopefully everybody's going to be rushing out doing a good deed tomorrow.
I hope so. Be nice.
It's like that film, isn't it? Pay it forward. Jeanette, if you can tell us about the different groups of modern witchcraft today, because it's not, you can't just lump it all in one pot together. There are
not even in one cauldron.
Exactly. So there's the Alexandrian and there's Wicca.
There's Alexandrian and Gardnerian. They form a combined unit now, which is called Wicca. But there are other groups outside that. They don't get so much publicity, but they still exist, and they charge along quite happily.
Who Gerald Gardner was and Alex Saunders.
Yes, Gerald learnt his craft from Dorothy Clutterbuck.
That's a name.
It's a name and a half, actually. And he wrote his book High Magic's Aid. This he wrote before the repeal of the Witchcraft Act, so it's written as a story rather than as reality. He lived a long while in Malaya and around there, and was very interested in the folklore before returning to England, which, as I say, he started studying under Dorothy Clutterbuck, learnt her form of magic. There's lots of people who argue that it started with Dorothy. Whether it did or whether it didn't, no proof is not actually proof. It wouldn't stand up in a court of law. So I tend to think, I do a lot of gianting. I know this is outside the subject. And that used to be done in every town and in every festival. And yet there's about 6 recorded incidences from medieval times.
Of
giants, that's all there is recorded. So you've got witchcraft, which is an undercover. Obviously has to be done quietly. It's hardly surprising that nobody wrote anything down. For a start, they couldn't write. They could read more than we give them credit for, but writing was considered another skill entirely. And the only way you could get something written was going along to the local priest and asking him to write it down for you. So guess what? They didn't do it. So this is my theory. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. There isn't anything that's been traced as yet.
So would be things would be passed on in stories as well?
Yes, and by word of mouth. The Druids, for argument's sake, used to teach everything. There was nothing written down there. Even though a lot of them could write Latin, they didn't write anything down. It was against their teachings to do so. Everything had to be learnt by rote. And it's the same with witchcraft. Again, everybody had to learn what you needed to know.
Because didn't Nostradamus have a lot of scrolls and that had to be hidden?
Yeah, because he needed to put things in code because of the Inquisition. He was arrested at one time.
What do you know of your research of Aleister Crowley?
He was a very intelligent man that was actually a very, very, very well-known climber. Climber.
Okay.
He was the first person to climb K5.
I didn't know that.
And he was very, very well studied in every type of magic, Greek, Roman, everything that you could possibly study. And he tried a lot of the old rituals out. Unfortunately, as far as I'm concerned, I'm sure that there's a lot of Crowley followers that will disagree with me. I think when he got into drugs and such at a later age, I think he lost it. And I think it's a great pity. He was a great student of magic early on.
Because was it him who created the Order of the Golden Dawn?
He had a lot to do with it, yeah.
But he didn't create that?
There were a few people involved.
Okay. Now, witchcraft is very popular in the culture today, and because of Harry Potter, it's really brought it to the forefront. But there is such a thing called PEBL, isn't there?
Yes.
So you can tell us about PEBL, please.
PEBL liaises with the government, and we've got the oath in court changed so that you don't necessarily need to affirm or swear on the Bible.
Okay.
You can swear by your deity, and this is also, of course, helps Hindus and other ethnic groups who don't wish to affirm or obviously to swear on the Bible. We're now discussing with them about how we can be best represented in schools when they deal with different types of religions, and how they would best represent witchcraft, or paganism rather, and its many little branches. Because we're the 7th largest religion in the country now.
That is amazing.
Thanks to the census.
But you think it could be higher, don't you?
I think it could be a lot higher. I don't think we'd probably go up the scale very far, but possibly up to the 6, yeah.
Because I think some people...
Because we wouldn't touch the really major religions yet.
Few more Harry Potter films, maybe. You
never know. Much to the government's surprise, they found that 40,000 people put down some form of pagan religion. 40,000.
Wow.
And that doesn't include those who put Jedi. Of which a great deal of them actually are pagans, but didn't want to tell the government that they were, so they put down Jedi.
Well, I'm not surprised if, we're talking about the persecutions, and I think people are still worried about that, aren't they?
Yeah, there are lots of people who worry about their jobs.
Especially,
I mean, in America, only last year somebody lost their job over such a stupid thing as they did some sleight of hand conjuring tricks.
What up there?
In the Bible Belt in America, yeah. And for that he lost his job.
So today, I guess people are quite wary about really stating who they are and what they do, because there's so many people probing into people's private affairs, and it's done quite easily these days.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised if people do practice the witchcraft, that they don't put that down in black and white. And because of what we were talking about in Africa, where people are still murdered for these things. Yeah. Now we're going to go on a little journey, and we're going to see the haunting ground or stomping ground of Matthew Hopkins, who was the Witchfinder General.
Yes.
And we're just going to have a look at the place where he was, and where he did put a lot of women and men and some children to their deaths. Right, Jeanette, if you can just tell us the history behind the Swan Inn.
The original of this inn, it lasted about 100 years. This one was built in 1700. Was owned by Matthew Hopkins. He actually bought it with money that he got from his father's will. And this is one of the places he used to walk his subjects.
Oh, right.
Both men and women.
Mm-hmm. This is Sherry Singleton. Sherry is the owner of the Swan Inn, and she's very kindly going to show us the very old part of the inn and tell us something about it.
Well, welcome. This is our wine store, and it's alleged that this is part of the original foundations of the building, and this is the part of the original building that Matthew Hopkins lived in. And it has been documented in Malcolm Gaskell's book, Witchfinders, that Matthew Hopkins did indeed run the Thorn in Mistley during his lifetime, and possibly held some of his trials here.
Okay. Do you know how old this part is itself?
I just know there are some original foundations, so it could go back to the 1500s. I don't know, but the new building is Georgian.
Okay. Do you, just for the record, have you ever had any spooky experiences down here?
Not down here as such. Upstairs, when we were doing the refurb, we had a couple of strange experiences where doors would be locked, doors that didn't have keys actually, and I was the only person that could open them. So I don't know what that's supposed to mean.
So there was something a little bit weird going on.
Could be, I don't know. My big builders couldn't open the door, but I was the only one that could do it, and it really worried them.
Do you know if any of the other staff, just for the record, has had any strange happenings?
We've had a couple of things with glasses flying across the bar for no way to explain that. I mean, it could be vibration, but I'm not too sure. The girls upstairs might have some stories, but I've just had a very happy vibe through this building. Well, I've been here 5 years now, so I think it's got a very good vibe.
As legend has it, this is supposed to be the day when he haunts this area.
Oh, right.
One of the roads, yes. So we have come today especially just to do some
Well,
filming.
I'll keep my eyes peeled. And
well, thank you so much. Sure. And you're going to let us go and visit one of the rooms where it is known to be a little bit unusual.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
So appreciate your time. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Now we've come to one of the rooms inside the Swan Inn where Matthew Hopkins actually brought the victims that he accused of witchcraft, and he actually did some horrendous torturing here. Can you explain what actually went on behind the scenes?
Well, technically, of course, he wasn't allowed to torture anybody.
Okay.
Which didn't mean to say he didn't invent his own way of doing things. After the swimming down at the pond, he'd bring them back up here and then look for witch marks, which he'd do with a long pin, and stick these into any mole or any perfect part of your body, looking for an area that, according to him, didn't make you scream in pain as he stuck this great needle into you.
Sounds horrendous.
It does indeed. And obviously, by the time that they'd finished with people, they were too much in
pain.
Yeah. You've got blood issuing out from all these different spots that they've already tried. You don't almost care, and by the time... And he would carry on and on until he found something
relentlessly
where you were just too tired and ill to actually complain, when once more he did it, and that was your witch spot. This is where, of course, he insisted you're familiar fed, both on your psychic energy and on your blood. Then, sometimes beating his poor victims, both men and women, though more women than men. He'd then tie them onto a stool so that you were sitting cross-legged for 24 hours. So you can imagine how the limbs
really
cramp and, to say the least, pins and needles. And then it obviously gets worse and worse from there.
That is excruciating, isn't it?
That can be excruciatingly painful.
Then he'd walk you. And by that, he means that they had a person on either side supporting you. And you were walked up and down these rooms for not only hours, but days and nights. And he would change the people that held you up, walking you until your feet bled. And then, when you were completely dazed, you had no idea what was going on. And we're talking about old people mainly.
Why do you think he had such a hatred and did this? Why was that?
Well, he was born at a time when James I was on the throne. Now, he was definitely, my own little word is witchophobic. He had the Bible translated from Latin, and there, to please him, there's this little bit saying that never suffer a witch to live. The actual wording on the original Greek and Hebrew were never suffer a poisoner to live.
So it was changed.
It was changed to suit him, to please him. He already knew what it contained originally, of course, because he was a learned and educated man. So Matthew Hopkins was born at this time when there was this big hoo-ha about witchcraft. When James I went over to get his bride, there was a big storm blew up at sea, and he blamed witches, and witches died because of this storm at sea. Of course, not everybody that was accused of witchcraft actually practiced, and probably most didn't. Most were just old people that were picked on, either out of jealousy or to get their property.
Yes, I have read that.
Yes, or like Matthew Hopkins, just to be paid. Because he was paid quite a lot of money every time he caught witches.
Do you know how much he was paid, say,
At
per
one
witch
place,
or group?
£23. Can you imagine how much
That's
that?
A lot of.
When
is
labourers,
that per person?
No, that was what he took from Swanley. Not sure quite.
But that, in those days, that's still a lot
That
of
was
money.
a lot of money.
That's a fortune.
You're talking about wages of a dozen people for the year. And he was taking this per week. He had letters. I mean, he was quite an educated man. He could write in both English and Latin.
Yes.
And this probably he learnt abroad. His mother was of Huguenot descent, and possibly they sent him to one of the Huguenot countries, and he went to university there because he didn't. Not that anybody's found any connection with the university in England. So he was quite educated. He knew what he was doing of. He died at 27 of TB. Wow. So he was quite a young man when he started.
So he actually set out with the intention of making this a career, just to make money.
Yes, I mean his brother had a ministry and was thrown out of that for unattendance to his flock. So the whole family was a little
shady.
Perhaps not shady, but certainly, let's say, work shy anyway. Matthew Hopkins, Witchfinder General. That's a title he gave himself. Parliament, although he claimed it was handed down from Parliament, actually, when somebody actually bothered to check, they found out that it was something he completely made up himself.
Was he the only one called Witchfinder General?
Yeah, because there wasn't such a post.
A title. What other areas apart from round here did he go?
All through Essex.
Okay.
All of the villages. I was going to say there's a lovely letter. It's hardly that. It says, "I'm going to come to your village, and I will find your witches. And if you don't pay me, well, I won't come. Therefore, you can keep your witches."
So
that's basically what it boiled down to in a much more lighter terms. Don't know.
But that did exist, yes.
Yeah, it exists. It still exists today.
If you can just tell me about the witch trials that took place, the ducking.
Yes. It's called swimming. Swimming the Witches.
Oh.
And the idea was invented by James I, our dear old James, our witchophobic. He decided that because witches had rejected the baptism, which of course is water, so the water will then reject them. So this is why if they float, they are guilty of witchcraft. And if they sink, if the water will allow them to, then they're fine.
But they drowned.
But they, some of them just happened to drown. Well, there we are, as far as they're concerned. They were only old women and unproductive members of society, so do we care? Anyway, that's not me, of course, I'm referring to them. So what they used to do, but Matthew, of course, improved on this. He tied the right thumb to the left toe and the left thumb to the right toe, so that they're tied like this. They were then tied with ropes round the waist, and they went to either side of the pond. And these poor old women, some of them suffering senile dementia,
being awful,
were pushed into the water. So, of course, if he wanted them to float, the men on either side just pulled the ropes tight. And there was nothing that the poor person, innocent or guilty, was absolutely irrelevant. They floated. And lo and behold, proved as a witch.
So then it went on for more torture.
It went on to the torture.
I bet some of them just wished that they could just end it there, because they must have known what was coming next. If they were floating, they knew that was just the beginning. It must have been awful. In the inn, obviously it's been built up over the years. Now, do you know of any people who've had any sort of strange experiences here?
Well, actually I have.
Okay.
I visited it, I suppose about 10 years ago. And it was a beautiful hot summer's day, unlike we've been filming today. And this room and some of the others up here were absolutely freezing.
Wow.
I mean, it's a cold day, so it's not surprising that it's chilly in here today. But on a boiling hot day, absolutely freezing.
That is strange.
And you could feel it as you walked through the door. It sort of chilled you to the soul. And then when we were having dinner in the restaurant downstairs, lovely little inn, you could see the curtains blowing out of some of the rooms, blowing out of the rooms.
Oh, that is strange.
It was cold.
I think some of the other staff have had some strange experiences.
Doors have locked and doors have slammed and glasses have jumped off from the bar downstairs, we were told.
I wonder if that was through Matthew or the people that was here. What do you think?
Oh, I think it's got to be the people that were here. You must be giving out so much psychic energy.
Giving out a negative imprint. Yeah.
I mean, you're not trying to hurt the people that are here now, but it must be just an explosion. Must have just left like a shockwave. Pain, really.
Must have been awful for them. Terrible. Now we're actually going to move on from here, and we're actually going to visit the area where he is actually supposed to have walked on this day, actually.
Yes.
And we're going to see his area where he is buried, his gravestone area. If you can just tell us how Matthew Hopkins himself came to his end.
Yes. He was operating as Witchfinder General for about 3 years. During that time he killed 240 men and women.
Okay.
But he, after 3 years, died an early death at 27 with TB, or consumption as they would have called it. There's documented proof that he died on the 12th of August 1647 of TB. So we do know that where he ended his days, and at quite an early age.
Yes, it sounds like his karma came back
to
take him.
It does indeed.
Well, Jeanette, I want to thank you so much for all of your time that you've given us and your knowledge on the subject of witchcraft and Matthew Hopkins. It's been absolutely extraordinary.